Okay, good evening. Welcome to Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Behaaloscha. It's a bit late due to the halacha Shiur running over a little bit, but let's see how much we can do. Some very, very interesting ideas. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. Let's start, if you like, with the main themes of the Sedra, one of the main themes of the Sedra, and I'll explain it by way of what we try and do week in, week out, and that is, we have the Haftorah, and the Haftorah has got to be in some way connected to the Sedra. So let's start backwards. What is the connection between the Sedra and the Haftorah, and where sort of the main theme, if you like, of the Sedra and the Haftorah will emerge? Well, the obvious connection between the Sedra and the Haftorah is that Parshas Behaaloscha begins with lighting of the menorah. The pasuk says, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemar, daber el Aharon v'amartu elav, Behaaloscha es haneros." When you light the candles, el mul pnei hamenorah, ya'iru shivas haneros. Okay, that's the famous opening of Parshas Behaaloscha, talking about the daily lighting of the menorah in the Mishkan and in the Beis Hamikdash. The Haftorah for Parshas Behaaloscha is from Zechariah. Now, it's not so well known. Let's read the first opening psukim. Vayoshav hamalach hadover bi. Zechariah is talking and says that the malach who was talking to me returns. Vaya'ireini, and he wakes me up. Ki'ish asher ye'er mishnoso. He sort of wakes me up like you wake up a man from his sleep. Vayomer elai ma tzoroeh. The malach said to Zechariah, "Tell me what you see." Vayomer ro'isi v'hinei menorah zohov. I see in front of me a golden menorah. Kula v'gula al roisha. There's like a bowl on top of it. V'shiva ne'aseh oleh, and there are 7 branches to it. So you see that the vision of a menorah and the malach's sort of prophetic interpretation of that vision, that's the connection. They're both talking about the menorah. However, I came across something very, very interesting. In the right, there's a sefer someone bought me, which is a compilation of many divrei Torah of Rabbi Shechter and Rav Meir Twersky. And Rabbi Shechter makes a fascinating observation about the connection between the Sedra and the Haftorah. And he says there's actually a hidden connection, separate to what we've said so far, between the Sedra and the Haftorah. Now let me explain it. Let's take a look at paragraph 1b. We know that the Rambam sets out 13 principles of faith. Shloisha Osa Ikarim, which is really, that is in the beginning of Chelek, which is in his commentary to the Mishnah in Sanhedrin. And these are number 6 and number 7. Ani ma'amin b'emunah shlema shekol divrei neviim emes. Number 1, I believe that all the nevuah of all the neviim is emes. That's number 6. Number 7, ani ma'amin b'emunah shlema shenevuas Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom hoysa amitis, that the nevuah of Moshe was true. V'shehu hoya av l'neviim, he was the father of all neviim. La'koidmin lefanav l'abay machrov. In other words, no one will match the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, interestingly, this concept is clarified further in the Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah. If you take a look at the 2 boxes, in the 4th box on the page, 5th box on the page, this is in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah Perek Zayin Halacha Vav. The Rambam sets out exactly in what way was the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu different to all other neviim. Says the Rambam, Ma hefresh yesh ben nevuas Moshe l'shar kol haneviim. Shekol haneviim b'chaloim oy b'mareh. All other neviim, they would have that nevuah either in the form of a dream, oy b'mareh, in some sort of vision. Moshe Rabbeinu misnabeh v'u'ar v'omed. Moshe Rabbeinu was prophesying, but he was fully awake and standing up. That's number 1. Kol haneviim al yidei malach. All other neviim, the nevuah came through a malach. Lefichach roim ma shehim roim b'mashal v'chida. There they see the prophecy through some sort of mashal, a parable, v'chida, like a riddle. However, Moshe Rabbeinu lo al yidei malach shenema peh el peh adaber boy. Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah was actually directly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was talking to him, kaviyachal, as a man talks to another man. Koloma she'ein sham mashal, there's no mashalim, carries on the Rambam, el roya hadova al buriyoi, he sees it clearly, below chida of below mashal, without a riddle and without a mashal. That's number 2. Number 3, kol hanaviim yureim v'nivholim. when other Nevi'im received the Nevuah, they were scared. They were shaking. On Moshe Rabbeinu Einakein. Moshe Rabbeinu was not. Number 4, Kol HaNevi'im Ein Misnabim B'chol Eis Shiur. So all other Nevi'im couldn't prophesize whenever they wanted to. But Moshe Rabbeinu Einakein Ele Kol Zman Sheyachva Yitzrach HaKodesh Levashtei V'Nevuah Shorei Olav. Whenever he wanted to, as Rashi says in this week's Parsha as well, that he just would go off and speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he could initiate that sort of communion. And that explains something else that happens in this week's Seder, says the Rambam. Because it says in Matan Torah, Leich Emer Elohem Shuvu Lochem La'alechem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu that after Matan Torah, he tells them all, go back to your tents. Va'ata pai amodim modi. But you, Moshe, stand here with me. Halamadata. Shekol HaNevi'im kasha nevuah mistalekes mehem chayzrim la'olam. As soon as their nevuah is finished, they go home. Shehu tzarchei aguf kulam kashar ha'am. They're human beings like any other person. They go home after their nevuah is finished. Lefichach ein parsha minishaseihem. They don't have to separate from their wives. Moshe Rabbeinu lechazer la'ohel harishon. He never went back to his home as it were. Lefichach pirish min ha'isha la'ilam. He separated from his wife forever after that, from Matan Torah onwards. And therefore he was totally connected constantly with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he was almost like on a level of Malachim, because he never sort of came down from that level of Nevuah, of that intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, you see therefore that the Rambam explains that the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu was qualitatively different to all other Nevi'im before and after. When the Rambam, that's the Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei Torah. When the Rambam in Meir Nevuchim describes this point more, he contrasts it to Zechariah. Because what happens in this week's Parsha, in the Haftarah? Take a look at the second box after 1b. These are the continuation of the Haftarah of Parshas Behaaloscha. So the Malach comes and sort of wakes up Zechariah and says, what do you see? And Zechariah says, well, I can see 2 menorahs and there are bowls on each side. Now carrying on that box, Pasuk Gimel, and this is Zechariah Perek Dalet, Ushnayim Zeisim Oleha, there are 2 olive trees there. Mimin Hagoyla, Echod Mimin Hagoyla ve'echod me'al Smoila. There's one bowl on the right of it and one bowl on the left. And so then I said to the Malach, my master, what are these? What am I seeing? Vayan HaMalach, and the Malach responds, Hadovebi, who's speaking to me, Vayom Elai, Halo Yedata Mahema. Don't you know what they are? Va'imar Lo Yadoni. I don't know, my master, I don't know what they are. Please explain to me the symbolism of the vision that I'm seeing. Vayan, Vayomer Elai, Leimo Zed VaHashem Azrubava, Leimo Lo B'chayav, Lo B'kach, Im Beruch Yam Hashem Tzivokos. Famous Pesukim. In other words, the point is that the Malach needed to explain this vision to Zechariah. And what was the vision? There were 2 olive trees that provided a continuous supply of oil, the fuel, which he explains symbolizes, as I've written here, all man's needs are provided by Hashem, but man must have eyes to see it, etc., etc. When the Rambam in Meir Nevuchim explains the difference of the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu with all other Nevi'im, he brings this example from Zechariah. Because Zechariah had to ask, excuse me, what am I seeing? I can't quite work it out. Don't you see what you're seeing? Can't you see it? Lo Yadoni, I don't see it, my master. And that, says Rabbi Shechter, is another connection between the Sedra and the Haftarah. Because in the Sedra at the end, Moshe Rabbeinu, he has the Nevuah, he speaks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Miriam speaks Lashon Hara, he's separated from his wife, but now we know why he's separated from his wife. Because when the Pasuk says, Shuvu Lochem Olechem, but you stay here, you're not going anywhere, I need constant communion with you. You see that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't just go back to regular mundane life. He was on a different level. And therefore, he could see things clearly, he didn't tremble, he was awake, and all the differences. And to bring that quality of the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu to the fore, in the Haftarah we contrast it with Zechariah, who didn't understand the vision. The Malach had to explain to him repeatedly what exactly he was seeing. And it's dafka that the Mer Nevuchim, when he brings out the quality of Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, he brings exactly Zechariah. If you look at the penultimate box on the page, Kfar Bi'arnu, they see through Mashalim, etc., etc. So he brings the Zechariah as a great illustration of a Novi who sees things through a mashal, doesn't always understand, has to ask, etc. So that is another connection, therefore, between the Seder and the Haftarah. The obvious connection is that the vision of the menorah in both, and the less obvious connection, the hidden connection, is the quality of the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu in contrast to all other Nevi'im. Okay, let's move on to the next idea. This is something I saw in Rabbi Shmuel's Sefer. Rabbi Shmuel he was the Rav of the Shtiva where I grew up in Gostrok's, a well-known personality here in Northwest London, sadly passed away a few years ago. He was a phenomenal Talmud Chacham, and he's got two lovely Sfarim on Chumash called the Yunei Chaim. And he says something fascinating, quoting the Malbim in this week's Parsha. So let's take a look at the bottom box on the page. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer, Asei lecha shtei chatzoisros. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, make for yourself two chatzoisros, two trumpets. Kesef out of silver, mikshe tasa osam, they've got to be out of a solid block, don't sort of add bits together. V'hoy lecha lemikra ha'eda, and you'll use them when you need to cool the people. This will be your sort of cooling system. The Bnei Aaron HaKohanim will blow the chatzotzros, and this will be for all generations. Okay, that's the well-known psukim Parshas Behaaloscha. Note that in Pasuk Ches, when it says who's going to blow the trumpets, it says Bnei Aaron HaKohanim. Now, interestingly, sometimes it says HaKohanim Bnei Aaron. Sometimes Bnei Aaron HaKohanim, sometimes HaKohanim Bnei Aaron. So that is really what he's going to discuss. Let's go through it. It says the Yunei Chaim, top of the next page. Ksiv. Ubnei Aaron HaKohanim Yisku B'chatzosros. Of a pasuk Yud, Ksiv, Utzkatim B'chatzosros Al Lesechem Al Ziv Shalmechem. V'chadai lahatik divrei HaSifri. It's worth quoting, says Rabbi Shmuel, the words of the Sifri. Be'inyan Tkiyas HaChatzotzros, when it comes to blowing of the trumpets. A fabulous, a very interesting machlokus between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva in the Sifri. Rabbi Tarfon sova, Shehat Tkiyas Elu Kasherim B'Balmum. That a Kohen who is a Balmum, whatever his mum is, he's got a broken leg, he can't hear, he can't see, whatever the mum is, he's allowed to blow the shofar, to blow the chatzotzros. Vehevi raya, shahari be'enov ra'a doidai, because, says the Sifri, that Rabbi Tarfon says, I've got a proof. I saw my uncle, shahaya chiger, he was lame, tekeh b'chatzotzros. So you see that a Kohen who's a Balmum is able to blow the chatzotzros. Velochein chora api b'Rabbi Akiva. And therefore I'm very annoyed with Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that a Balmum cannot blow the chatzotzros. Even though Rabbi Tarfon brought a raya, brought a proof from what his own eyes saw, his own uncle, who was a chiger, blew the chatzotzros, but Rabbi Akiva did not back down. He said that a Balmum is possible to blow the chatzotzros. Va'oma, and his response to Rabbi Tarfon was, that which he saw his uncle, who was a chiger, blow the shofar, that was a different mitzvah of chatzotzros. That was a mitzvah of blowing the shofar on or the chatzotzros on Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, but nothing to do with the regular blowing of the chatzotzros. Rabbi Tarfon kibbel dvarov, and Rabbi Tarfon says, you know what, you're right. I saw my uncle, it must have been Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which is a separate mitzvah of the Chatzotzros, which is to do with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and is not to do with the regular blowing of the Chatzotzros. You're right, Rabbi Akiva. And therefore I agree with you that ordinarily a chiger or any other Balmum is not able to blow the Chatzotzros. And then he said tremendous things. Omar, Ashrecha Avram Avinu, how lucky Avram Avinu is, sheyotza Akiva mechalotzecha. He has a descendant like Rabbi Akiva. Tarfon Ra v'shochach, Tarfon saw with his own eyes, but he got it wrong, he made a mistake. Akiva doresh me'atzmai u'maskim lahalacha. And Rabbi Akiva darshaned himself his view that a Baal Mum is possible with the Chatzotros, and he's right. And the halacha is like him. Anyone who detaches themselves from you, Rabbi Akiva, kaporish mechayev, he's sort of detaching himself from life itself. Ad kan l'shen hasifri. Now, says Rabbi Shmuel, al sipur zeh ein lo hosef. I've got nothing to add to this remarkable exchange. Rak shekosha Rabbi Akiva. I've got a question on Rabbi Akiva. Shepoisel ba'ali mum litzkias chatzotros mimash shemavua b'reish Parshas Emor. Because what it says in the beginning of Parshas Emor, Shekoyen balmum also litamel lemesim. Harikan ksiv hatoya kohanim ubnei Aaron v'chein hason. It says the words kohanim ubnei Aaron both in Parshas Emor and in our Sedra. So how come there's a difference between the two? That a balmum is also to be matamel lemesim. And he holds differently when it comes to he holds differently when it comes to chatzotros. So how do you reconcile Rabbi Akiva? For Tiritz HaMalbim, the Malbim answers Shehakol Tolui Al Seder Hadvarim. You've got to really look at the psukim carefully. Be'inyan Tumas Kohanim Ksiv, when it comes to Tumas Kohanim, it says Emor El HaKohanim B'nei Aaron. That's the order. Kohanim then B'nei Aaron. Hikdima HaTorah Milas Kohanim LeBnei Aaron. Or Be'inyan Chatzotros Ksiv LeHepach. But when it comes to the Chatzotros, it says the other way around. Or Bir Hadvarim Hukacha. This is the explanation. Milas Kohanim, when it says the word Kohanim, Meramezes leKohanim Shehim Tamimim Begufam Uksherim L'Sharis. It's referring to Kohanim who are Tamimim, and in their physical body, Uksherim L'Sharis. The Imbo Achrov B'nei Aaron, and if it then says after Kohanim, it says the words B'nei Aaron, Bola Hoisif Kol B'nei Aaron. Not just those who are perfect in their physical, without blemishes, but Bola Hoisiv al Kol B'nei Aaron, i.e. Afilu Oisam She'enam Ruim L'Sharis, even those who could not be Mesharis properly. Avol Be'inyan Chatzotros, and therefore, in the previous case, all Kohanim, even Baalei Mum are included. Avol Be'inyan Chatzotros Kasev, or B'nei Aaron HaKohanim, what's Saloma, Dafka Oisam B'nei Aaron, Dafka Oisam B'nei Aaron, She'ruim L'Sharis, La'afuke Balmum. That way round, B'nei Aaron means HaKohanim dafka those who are roy l'sharis to exclude the Balmum. You see, says the Malbim, that Rabbi Akiva saw in the psukim themselves the order more than what Rabbi Tarfon could see with his own eyes. Noira v'ayim, concludes Rabbi Shmuel. Remarkable. So you see, I can hear him saying it. You see that the words of the psukim indicate whether a Baal Mum would be included or not. Remarkable, very, very interesting. Let me just quickly finish this one final idea. This is something which is astonishing. I saw this in Rabbi Emmanuel Bernstein's Sefer. Something which we mentioned before, but just a short but very beautiful idea. In Behaaloscha, at the very end, you've got the famous story where Moshe Rabbeinu davens for Miriam. She speaks Lashon Hara about him, and she davens, and Moshe Rabbeinu davens, Kel no rafon lo. Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah is met by a very strange response of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Take a look at the paragraph 3. Vayitzak Moshe Hashem leimo kel no rafon lo. That's the famous short tefillah that Moshe expresses. Pasuk Yudalet. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response to this tefillah is, Va'aviha yorak b'foneha, and were her father to spit in her face, would she not be ashamed for 7 days? Let her be quarantined outside the camp for 7 days, and then she can be brought in. As Rabbi Emmanuel Bernstein puts it, this kal v'chomer argument that HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds is more suited to the Beis HaMedrash than for the conversation at hand. What a very strange response by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu. He makes a kal v'chomer. You know, if she wouldn't be, if her father were to spit in her face, wouldn't she be ashamed for 7 days? So kal v'chomer, this is against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She should be quarantined outside for 7 days. What is going on over here? A very strange response. So, the fabulous idea from the Bnei Yissaschar. We've seen this before on another occasion, and that is, there are 2 parallel sets of 13 midas. One is from Parshas Kisisa, Hashem Hashem Karachim V'Chanun, Vayav Hashem Pona Vayikra Hashem Hashem Karachim V'Chanun Chapayim Rav Chesed V'Emes Netzach Chesed Alofim, etc., etc. Then you've got a second set of Yud Gimel Midas. That's what every man says every morning at the end of Rabbi Shmuel Omer. At the end of just before Baruch She'amar, before Mizmor Shir, we say Rabbi Shmuel Omer. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, B'shloish esrei midas haTorah nidreshes. That the Torah is darshaned, is extrapolated by way of 13 principles. The first one is Kal V'chomer. The second one is Gezeira Shava. The last one is Shnei Ksuvim HaMachishim Zeh Asher V'Koz V'Shishi V'Achir B'Neim. The 13 ways in which Torah is darshaned. Now, the Bnei Yisoscha says that there is a parallel between each of these 13 midas. In other words, Hashem Hashem Kel Racham V'Chanun, each one marries up with the 13 midas, Kal V'chomer, Gezeira Shava, etc., etc. Now, let's take a look, because this is going to explain the very strange response that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Moshe Rabbeinu. Tehine, this is the last box. Hamidas Shator Nidreshes Bohem, Halohim Torah Shebal Peh Nimsru Misinai. This is Torah Shebal Peh that was given down from Har Sinai. The 13 principles, Kal V'chomer, Gezeira Shava, etc., parallel the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Dahainu, K'sheyilmoid ha'adam midas Kal V'chomer, when a person engages in each of these midas. For example, the first one, Kal V'chomer, Ma'ore Midas Kel, that activates the first of the other set of midas, i.e. Kel. He says, "V'ayim bekisvei hakodesh ma'marinu harav doiv ber." That's the Maggid of Mezrich, who says, "Hinei Moshe shehispal lachosei kel narafon Allah." When Moshe Rabbeinu davened for his sister in this week's Parsha, Hinei rotze la'ira midas kel. He wanted to arouse the midah of kel in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which would generate a refuah to his sister. Heishiv la'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds, "V'avia yorak, etc." Hainu limud Kal V'chomer. That is involving a Kal V'chomer. V'yes'oire midas kel. And therefore it's the Kal V'chomer which is going to activate the midah of kel. Before I go on, and therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu asked Kel Narafon Allah, he wanted Kel Narafon Allah. Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, show your kindness to my sister, let her be cured. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we look at that response, elaborate, strange response. It's not elaborate, it's not strange. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making a Kal V'chomer. He's activating the Kel. That's how you trigger it, because each one corresponds to the Yud Gimel Midas. So therefore, the Kal V'chomer responds to the Midah of Kel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by invoking a Kal V'chomer, he's triggering, he's activating the Midah of Kel. Continues the Bnei Yisoscha, which is the next one on the list. Shuv Ma'ore Midas Rachum, that's the next one. V'chein be'inach, and so too with all of them. And therefore, if a person chas v'shalom has got a avonos and there's a gezeira against him, hinei belam the gezeira shava, by learning the gezeira shava, ma'ore midas rachum. That is what activates the next midah of rachum. U'midas rachum zeh skulosav u'rachum yichape avoin v'lo yashchis. He won't destroy, he'll forgive. Afilu k'shegoza chas v'shalom hashchosa al sonei Yisrael v'midas rachum yichape avoin v'lo yashchis. So it's an amazing insight of the Bnei Yisoscha that each of the 13 midas, the parallel sets, each one activates the other. They're connected. So when Moshe Rabbeinu says Kel Narafon Allah, using the midah of Kel, please HaKadosh Baruch Hu, use this midah of kindness, of empathy, whatever you want to call it, of Kel, to give a refuah to Miriam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually saying, Moshe, fine, I will. How does he do that? By making a Kal V'chomer. Because that's the first one of each set of the Yud Gimel Midas, and that will therefore activate it, that will trigger it, and so too with all the other Midas of the 13 Yud Gimel Midas. So there we have it, 3 ideas for this evening. Number 1 is the Seder and the Haftarah. The obvious connection between the Seder and the Haftarah is the lighting of the menorah in both, but the more subtle, hidden connection is the sort of the contrast of the Nevuahs of Moshe Rabbeinu and Zechariah. It's the Rambam himself who brings the example of Zechariah, of a Novi who hasn't got the clarity that Moshe Rabbeinu has. Then we saw the Chatzotros explains Rabbi Shmuel using the Malbim, fabulous, to explain that interesting Sifri and why it's Bnei Aaron, HaKohanim, sometimes it's not as Kohanim Bnei Aaron, to explain his position. And then, lastly, this idea of the Maggid of Mezrich is brought in the Behaaloscha to explain HaKadosh Baruch Hu's somewhat strange response to Moshe's tefillah, that actually he's initiating the process of Miriam's recovery.